Winter's come early this year. The opening line which accompanies the latest revelation in the Little Nightmares universe, which comes in the form of a limited 4-issue series of comics produced in partnership with Titan Comics. Yes, that Titan Comics, who produced the original Little Nightmares comic books back in July of 2017. Much like the eagerly anticipated Little Nightmares 3, this new comic series is also scheduled for release in 2025, though we don't yet have a concrete release date. But do not despair, children. We don't have a release date, but what we do have is time. Time to speculate on what stories will be weaved throughout this series and what mysteries they could uncover as we're plunged ever deeper into the ever-widening expanse that is the nowhere. So take a deep breath, little ones, and let us explore exactly what it is that divides sleep from waking. This is the ESCAPEE theory. But first, the obligatory spoiler warning. This video will of course contain spoilers for Little Nightmares 1, Little Nightmares 2, Very Little Nightmares, the Little Nightmares Titan comics, and potentially the Descent into Nowhere comics, if we're right about this. And of course, as always, a massive shout out to legendary Little Nightmares content creator It's Just Jord, without whom I would not be making this content, I would not have found this niche on YouTube, and I just wouldn't have the knowledge I have. So please don't forget to check out Jord's channel in the link in the description below. Now let's get into this. Let's begin with what little information we do have about this new release, and let's try to break it down to see if we can't decrypt a storyline. And where better to start than the title. Descent into Nowhere seems a fitting title, given the ethereal dual world structure in which the Little Nightmares universe is set, as was outlined in the audio fiction series The Sounds of Nightmares, and further expanded on by Otto and the Ferryman, characterising the action of accessing the nowhere as sinking deeper. Now, while not much can be discerned from the title alone, we can expect that these stories will likely give us more examples of the characters contained within them accessing the nowhere, which is exciting, given that we only have one documented occurrence of this so far. That, of course, being the story of Noon from the Sounds of Nightmares podcast. Speaking of, let's move on to the next piece of information we have regarding this series, the cover art, which depicts two characters who we are yet to meet, the Silent Child and the Lost Detective. Let's try to break down this image a little and see what we can gather about the story. First, the obvious. We are likely following the story of two characters, one being our young girl depicted on the milk carton, indicating that she is lost, most likely taken to the nowhere, the other being the detective, again quite likely employed to locate this missing child. What's probably also obvious is the fact that the silent girl is missing, given that her image is plastered on a milk carton. What is less obvious is that this particular method of awareness campaigning could give us some insight into where and when this story takes place. You see, the practice of advertising missing children on milk cartons began in 1984 in the United States with the tragic case of 6-year-old Ethan Patz, but was essentially phased out in the early 90s and was replaced by the Amber Alert system in 1996. This is valid because it gives us a pretty clear window of time when this story might be taking place, which allows us some insight into the technologies, practices, and systems in place at the time. Also, it would seem that most of what we know of the Little Nightmares universe is based in early Britain, given the general aesthetic of the nowhere that we've experienced, and of course the account of Noon and Otto, both of whom speak with British accents. However, in the UK, while missing children campaigns were and are conducted through posters, flyers, and media broadcasts, the milk carton method was never widely adopted. There were isolated efforts inspired by the American trend, but it didn't take off in the same way. One of the reasons the milk carton campaign didn't gain traction in the UK may have been related to differences in how milk was distributed. Milk delivery in the UK was often done by milkmen rather than sold in cartons, Additionally, public awareness campaigns in the UK tended to rely more on television, radio, and printed posters at schools and community centres. Now that may seem irrelevant to the actual story, and it likely is, but it leads me to believe that this new tale is going to take place in an American setting, rather than a British one. Anyway, with the history lesson over, let's consider what else is apparent in this image. There are two factors which stand out quite prominently to me, and likely to those of you who've taken a few minutes to inspect this image. Right here, we have an egg-shaped rabbit, which contains what we might assume to be sleeping pills, potentially 15ml temazepams judging by their colour and appearance. The fact that the capsule is open and the detective is depicted sleeping could indicate that she has taken them as a means to aid her descent into the nowhere. And finally, the shadow being cast on the wall. Now this is a detail that I like a lot. I find this particular part of the image the most complicated to break down due to the many interpretations of what it could be implicating. As you can see, the shadow is marked with a cross over where its mouth would be, just as with our new friend on the milk carton. So what might this mean? Could she be connected to our pint-sized mute? And if so, then how? Well, let's bear that question in mind while we try to break down the only other piece of evidence we have regarding this story. The description. Winters come early this year. In a dark cell in a cold dungeon, a child awakens. On a lone bridge over a bleak river, a detective wavers. The fight for their lives has begun. We are immediately met with themes of duality and a subtle insinuation that these two characters will have separate stories which are destined to intertwine. The silent child, with her tattered shirt and bandaged arm, shivers as the hissing snow falls from an unseen sky through the central shaft of her prison. She's not the only captive here. The echoed sobs and hushed whimpers from the other cages tell her that much. So right here the text goes into more descriptive terminology, giving us a clear image of our character and the environment she finds herself in. What we don't know just yet is whether or not she sustained her injuries in the nowhere, or if they were a part of the reason she ended up here. The lost detective, wreathed in fog, looks back on a life lived in the shadow of silence and stifled by the apathy of others. She steps up onto the stone wall dividing the bridge from the river below. She is not the only victim of this aggravated entropy. She'll soon learn that from the unexpected footsteps behind her. Our final eerie paragraph paints us a stark and powerful image, but it's also littered with phrases that highlight parallels between the detective herself and our missing tape-faced girl. Themes of silence being prevalent across both characters naturally draws our attention back to the image from the artwork, the detective's shadow being that of the missing girls. What do we suppose this could entail? Of course, until more is released regarding this story, it's going to be difficult to pinpoint anything with confidence. However, it's not unreasonable to speculate that these two characters may be even more linked than is initially apparent. Could the themes of being unheard be what connects these characters to one another emotionally? Or does the term "in the shadow of silence" shed more light on the particular choice of artwork that the developers have decided to share with us? It's wise to remember that the ergodic nature of this universe gives credence to the saying nothing is unintentional. There will be deeper meaning to this image, though our interpretation of that meaning could be wildly inaccurate. Now there is more to this theory that I have every intention of discussing. However, the images I happen across are not yet ready for public consumption. Therefore, out of respect for this franchise and the developers, I will not be sharing them nor discussing their contents here. Also, if you happen to have seen the images I'm referring to, I'd thank you to also respect the developers' wishes of keeping them to yourselves, and ask that you recognise that there is a reason we get what we get when we get it. But I'll say it again. Little ones, do not despair, because once again, we're given time. Time to further discuss, theorise, speculate and expand on what's to come. Remember, the idea of theorizing is not to spoil the outcome of these stories, but to develop our understanding of their ambiguous narrative and explore creative ways to expand on our beloved universe. Now, what might we conclude from this little breakdown? Well, we know that the characters are linked, but we aren't entirely sure how. But I think there are two possibilities, both of which share an incredibly exciting revelation. The first being that the detective has been hired to find the silent girl, and has a feeling that she is trapped in the nowhere, having been there herself as a child but unable to find her way back. The second is that the girl on the milk carton is likely the detective as a child. Her presence on the milk carton suggests she was once lost in the same way as the children she's now searching for. This reinforces the idea that she was spirited away by the ferryman as a child, but unlike many others, she managed to escape, or was released, though the reasons behind her escape remain a mystery. Now, whether the detective is the silent girl, was hired to locate the silent girl, or the silent girl is a remnant of the detective's haunted past, we can be excited about one thing in particular. In the detective, we have met our first ever nowhere escapee. Because if any of the above speculations are true, it means that at some point or another, she's visited the nowhere and found her way out, which would explain why she's aware of its existence, and why those she's tried to inform have dismissed her claims, as is evident in her description. Which brings me to the last and likely most hypothetical part of our analysis so far. This line in particular. She is not the only victim of this aggravated entropy. She'll soon learn that from the unexpected footsteps behind her. First, to clarify, entropy in this context is characterized as the lack of order or predictability, a gradual decline into disorder. And apathy is a lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. The text states that she is not the only victim of this aggravated entropy. So, who else do we know who's a victim of a gradual decline into disorder? Who else do we know who's stifled by the apathy of others? Who else do we know who's gone to questionable lengths in the hopes of sinking deeper? Whose footsteps do you think they could be? Questions and speculations for another time, as there is more to know, and even more to be released this weekend at New York Comic Con. So thank you all so much for watching this theory video. If you enjoyed any part of it, then please let me know by using the thumb buttons down below, preferably the upward facing one. Also, at the time of making this video, I'm just about to publish Chapter 4 of our speculative Little Nightmares 2 DLC, a series which I've worked extremely hard on, and I'd love it if you guys would take some time to check that out. I think you'll really enjoy it. Also, I hope that you'll all be joining me for our very special Halloween live stream, coming up on October 26th, where we can discuss thoughts, theories, speculations, observations, and new revelations to our heart's content. But until then, little ones, that's game over. Bye.